let me welcome all of you and thank you for inviting us here today with Isabel. We will give a presentation on the closure guidelines for 14-20 period. Maybe we can go on the first slide already, which is a bit of summary of the presentation, but we already heard that there will be 3 sessions today. So this slide is just a layout of the presentation points. Thank you for all the questions that you have submitted to us in advance. We will try to address them after each session based on their relevance to the session, and we will do our best. Before starting, I would like to emphasize that drafting the closure guidelines and drafting the closure guidelines and developing the procedures for closure, it is a collective effort of the entire Commission. Many people in DG REGIO were involved. Me and Isabel, as we were introduced, we work in the closure unit, so we are the face for you today to present the guidelines, but behind us there is a big team of colleagues who are working on the specific topics. We ourselves cannot be experts on any kind of topic, so that's why I would like to clarify already now that if there is a question that we cannot address during the meeting, we are happy to take it with us, contact the colleagues relevant for the subject, and come back to you with a better answer. Next slide, please. So before going into the deep subject, let's have a bit of a look of the process that we have been so far. As I said, the preparation of the closure guidelines, it's a collective effort, which we started, now it's 2 years ago, almost, in October, and in October 2020 and in March 21, the draft document was presented to the members of the AGCIF expert group, and we incorporated the valuable feedback that we received from all member states, who were very active, by the way. We incorporated in the final version. In October last year, the guidelines were adopted via Commission notice and published. You have a link, I included on the slides just for your ease of reference. Meanwhile, we also received more than 350 questions that were answered in a document accessible to everybody. I mean, it was distributed to the member states already. There is a huge repository of information there, so I can only invite you to consult it if you have a particular issue. And if not, you can contact your counterparts in the DG REGIO desks. Then in 21-22, we are doing meetings like the one today with all member states. I have to say we have covered most of the member states. We have quite a few presentations done already, but there are still some ahead of us. And meanwhile, the environment has changed. The Commission has adopted new legislation, and there is more in process of being adopted. So we are considering to modify the closure guidelines. I'm sure most of you are aware of the fast care proposal, so this would have an implication on some of the provisions we already have in the guidelines. So there is a modification ahead of us. We will try to publish it by the end of this year. This is our goal, but it's very much depending on when the fast care proposal will be adopted by the co-legislators. Next slide, please. So the concept of closure, I hope most of you have done closure before, 713 programs, so you know what is closure about. But in this programming period, there is a new concept, and this is the annual closure of accounts. And this was introduced by the legislator exactly with the view of simplifying the process at closure of the programming period, which we are heading nowadays. In the few coming years. So it will be not much of a difference between the annual closure of accounts and the final closure. However, there would be some particularities. You would hear today me and Isabel highlighting those that we consider most relevant. So hopefully we are well prepared this time, and it will be really a simpler and swifter closure process. The scope of the guidelines, it covers currently the ERDF, the ESF, the fishery funds, and the cohesion fund. However, I already mentioned that we are envisaging revision of the closure guidelines, and we will also extend the scope to cover the IPA CBC programs, since our colleagues from the Interreg unit consider, and we agreed that there is no need for a separate document since the IPA CBC has been governed also by the provisions of the CPR to a good extent. What is not covered is the funds that you see with the asterisk below. It's the FEAT, the AgriFund, and the any CBC. So for any CBC, there would be a separate closure guidelines drafted document, which will be published in the coming months, I hope. Another novelty that I included here is the possibility of early closure. Excuse me, this is a novelty for the 1420 closure process, because it is explicitly envisaged in the guidelines, and it can be benefited from this. You can benefit from this provision only if all the activities related to the implementation of the program has been carried out. I'm very happy to say that we already have 2 programs, mainstream though, who asked for such a provision to be used as an early closure. So that's quite a good news, I think. Next, please. Well, before preparing or before reaching the closure date, it's good to be aware of several deadlines which are between today and the date for submission of the closure package. The first one already expired, so I graded, I included it on the slide only for completeness, but it's not anymore relevant. The second one concerns the React EU resources, which I understood that the Interreg programs are not making use of this provision, so maybe also not so relevant, but I left it here for completeness. The last 2 are very important one. So the first is by the end of this year, there should be any adoption, or if there is a revision of the indicators targets, it should be submitted to the Commission by the end of this year. Unless, so there are 2 exceptions. The exception 1 is there is a change in the financial table. So transfers of financial resources between priority access. This is allowed until September 2023. And of course, this will have an implication on the indicators targets. So revision of the targets, of course, will be allowed until the September 23 if it's justified by the transfer of funds. The same would be for major projects. So you don't have, I understand, in Interreg programs so many major projects, but if there is a phasing request, it can have also an implication on the indicators. So in one sentence, indicator targets have to be modified by December this year, or on duly justified cases, September next year. to the next slide, please. Now, let's see what would be the last accounting year looking like. So the last accounting year would start July 20, on 1st of July 2023, and will run up to the end of June 2024. It will be a normal accounting year as any other, so the certifying authorities will submit interim payment applications. This time, the difference would be that if the program has an overbooking, it has to be included in the applications, in the payment applications, and has to be certified to the Commission at that moment. I will talk a little bit more on the overbooking in the next slide, so don't get stressed here about the overbooking. Once the 1st of July 24 arrives, as any other year, the certifying authority has to prepare a final application for an interim payment, and this would be the last moment to submit expenditure to the Commission. Of course, it will be with the overbooking, which hopefully you would have. And as any other accounting year, the Commission will reimburse 90% of it. So the 10% retention will be kept until the next February, and this will constitute the final balance, the 10%. On 15th of February 2025, as always, the accounts have to be submitted. The accounts consist of the four documents, so the accounts, the management declaration, the audit opinion, and the control report. And on top of those 4 documents, we have a final implementation report. We received a question, I think, for the date of submission of the final implementation report. It is 15th of February. It's not May, as it was the date for submission of the annual implementation report. So this is a bit different for closure, but final implementation report, you would hear from Isabel what is the content and the document, the information that you have to include. Just a reminder that the eligibility period ends in December 2023, but I think this is well-known fact, so I will not spend more time. Once we reach February 25, as I said, the 10% from the application made through the last accounting year will constitute the final balance. And next slide, please. We can see, no, next, yes. We can see how the calculation of the final balance will be made. Well, it will be made similarly to the calculations that the Commission was doing every accounting year, but there are more things to be taken into account. The first one is that we have to clear the initial and the annual pre-financing. This is done by program, by fund, and by category of region, of course. The annual pre-financing is cleared every year, as you know. But the initial pre-financing will only start to be cleared when the maximum absorption of the program is reached, at latest at closure. If there is no sufficient expenditure, unfortunately, this might result in a recovery process. The next bullet point is the 2020 accounts. You would remember, I hope, it wasn't so long time ago, that when the pandemic broke, the Commission adopted two modifications to the CPR regulation, and one of them gave this possibility not to recover the amounts which were due to be recovered through the process of closure of accounts in the year 2020. Unfortunately, these amounts have to be either cleared or recovered at closure. So this is something which will be considered when we calculate the final balance. The famous, I call it flexibility. Now it is 10. Currently, it is 10% flexibility, which was introduced in the legislation by the CRIP modification of the CPR. With the fast care proposal, there is a provision that envisages to increase from 10 to 15%. But the way it functions, this flexibility is the same as it was in the 713 period. It means that if a priority access is overbooked and another priority is underspent, they can be compensated up to the 15% of the overbooked priority. Overbooking. So, as I mentioned in the beginning, in the 1420 period, we have a novelty which is called annual closure of accounts. This brings a lot of simplifications, hopefully, to the process. However, it brings also one negative aspect, and this is that with every closure of the accounts every year, the next payment application starts from zero. So the new accounting year starts from zero, the payment applications, because we are closing the 12 months before, and then we start from zero. This brings the problem of overbooking if it is declared not in the last accounting year. So if it is declared, let's say, in accounting year 22-23, with the closure of accounts, which will be done in February 24, the overbooking will be lost. So that's why the Commission introduced in the closure guidelines this to facilitate, not to facilitate, but actually to overcome this negative implication of the annual closure. We introduced the provision in the closure guidelines that please introduce overbooking only in the last accounting year. Like this, you would be able to benefit from the 10 or 15% flexibility, the point above, or also, even if there is no need for the flexibility, for example, the entire program is overbooked, so there is no need for compensation, you would be able to benefit from the overbooked expenditure in case irregular amounts are found during the closure process or even after the closure process. So this expenditure will stay in the program for this. Next slide, please. So once the final balance is calculated, the payment, hopefully it's a payment, not a recovery, but the financial transaction is dependent on two documents, two other documents, or two conditions, let's say. The first one is the acceptance of the accounts, and the other one is the acceptance of the final implementation report. Whichever is later will trigger the deadline. So if the report, the final implementation report, is accepted before the accounts, then the accounts will be the second document, and they are triggering 3 months deadline for payment of the final balance. If the accounts are accepted in May, which is another provision in the CPR, so the accounts have to be accepted by the end of May, and the final implementation report will not be adopted by that moment, excuse me, then the final implementation report acceptance will trigger 1 month deadline for payment of the final balance. So this is very important. There will be no financial transaction upon adoption of the acceptance of the accounts. So I hope it's clear, but if not, I'm happy to clarify it further. As always, legality and regularity issues can be raised by the Commission after the payment of the final balance, and even after the payment, after the closure of the program. But this is also something which you are familiar from 713 program, so I think it's not a problem for you.